Hi, everyone. Hello to our live stream audience out there as well. My name is Rebecca Stummy. I'm the producer here for live events at LAist, and I just want to welcome you all here to this night with Story Collider. We are so happy to have you here. I just want to do a few audience poll questions before we get started. Who is here for the first time at the Crawford? Anybody? Oh my gosh, wow. Welcome. Thanks for coming out on this frigid evening. I appreciate it. I appreciate your sacrifice. Who here listens to us at LAist 89.3? Okay, great. Who reads our stories on laist.com? Ooh, wait a minute. Okay, I need more hands than that next time. Okay. Who listens to our podcast from LAist Studios? Uh-oh, that's way too low. Okay, I'm going to give a plug for our podcast right now. We have a new one called The Castle in the Imperfect Paradise podcast feed. It's incredible. I would highly encourage you to check that out. It's a really great, really juicy, a lot of hot gossip in there. So check it out. You won't be sad. Okay, so thank you all so much for your support. It means that we get to do what we love to do, and we appreciate that so much. If you are in a position where you can give, please visit laist.com/give when you have a chance. But the bottom line of the story is go to laist.com for everything that you need. You can also find out about all of our upcoming events at laist.com/events. We have one more event before the end of this year. It's an Artbound screening next week on Tuesday. It's about East-West players, so please come join us to watch a documentary, and then we'll have a talk back afterwards. Okay, and a couple more things before we start. In case of an emergency, you can go back out the way you came, or there are emergency exit doors behind those curtains right there. If you have anything that makes noise, please take a minute to silence it right now. We don't want to disturb the performers on stage. And I think that's it for me, so I will turn it over to our hosts for the evening, Bryan Kett and Leslie Berntsen. Yes.
Thank you, Becca. Hi, everybody. Hi. I have to sit during our show, so we're going to do a Statler and Waldorf vibe over here in the name of disability justice. So I'm just going to roast him all night. We're going to have a great time, aren't we?
Hi, we are.
Yeah, we are. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie.
I'm Bryan. We are Story Collider. So this is our second time we've done a show with LAist. How many of you are here for the first time for a Story Collider show? Just show of hands. Wow, that's like a lot of people.
Amazing.
Let the audio show. That's a lot of people. It's great. So a little bit about Story Collider. We are an organization. We're based in New York. We're all around the country in a bunch of cities, and our mission is just to essentially humanize science through narrative, to show that science impacts all of us, and it's not just people in lab coats with test tubes, right? It galvanizes us. It binds us together. So we'll have scientists up here. We'll have storytellers up here. We have a whole litany of that, but I'll let Leslie continue.
Yeah, so we've got some wonderful tellers with us tonight. We've got Shein Ei Cho, Sirina, Nabhan. Who else we got?
We have a couple of dear friends of mine. We have David Crabb and Kevin McGeehan. They're over here too. You're going to hear them. You're going to love all of them. It's really fun. Thank you for all being here. Please come in, sit. We love you. Hi.
Yeah, so like Bryan said, some of them are scientists like me.
And then there's also a storytelling scene, and some of them are just, I'm one of those people in the stories. I'm a former high school biology and physics and chemistry teacher and earth science. I did it all. But
You're also very famous. I'm going to make you do this.
Yeah. I'm
very famous storyteller.
Super famous.
Yes.
But see, Tracy, I know Tracy. I love seeing Tracy. Yeah. But what's so lovely is we're just here to kind of hold this space for this. So thank you for coming, right? We'll see how science impacts all of us just through the whole spectrum.
Yeah, our shows have themes, don't they, Bryan?
They do have themes. Our theme tonight is that of insights, right? Maybe you saw on the logo. It
said insights. I think it did.
Yeah, and it was a light bulb. That's the logo. And so driving over here, I was thinking, like, what's an insight I've had recently just to kind of play this? And they can come in all shapes and forms. And one that I had during the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, all I would do was just drink tea. I was that guy. I'd be like, I was really sophisticated, right? Like, I thought I was better than everyone. And during the middle of the pandemic, there was a knock at my door when everyone was quarantining. And it was my upstairs neighbors. And I opened it, and all there was like this 32-ounce bottle of cold brew concentrate. And I'd never dabbled before. I never really understood coffee. And I texted my neighbors, and they're like, yeah, it fell off the back of a truck. Why don't you enjoy it? I'm like, okay, I'm not doing anything else right now. I didn't know you were supposed to cut it with water. So it's supposed to be 4 ounces of the concentrate to 12 ounces of water, and I poured 16 ounces into a glass. I'm like, okay, let's try coffee for the first time. And I would just sweat, and I would shake, and I would see God. And then I did it again the next day, and I called them, and I'm like, hey, you got any more of that? Like, how have you had that many servings? I'm like, you gave me 32 ounces. I drink 16 at a time. This is to say, now that's all I really ever want to do. That's all I ever want to talk about. That's the best part of my day, and I can't wait till tomorrow when I get to do it again. So that's where we're at.
I have other questions about how that went. I'm not going to ask in front of an audience, but I have
Thank
more
you.
questions for you later.
Leslie, any stories about insights for you?
Do I ever? So during college, I was an RA, or a resident assistant. And what that looked like during the academic year was I got to be like a den mother, a teen mom for like 40, 50 like freshmen, first year college students. It was amazing. That's what it looked like during the academic year. During the summer, I went to NYU. So anyone who was doing like an internship in New York could come and live in the dorms. And it had very much like a Love Island vibe to it over the summer. And like pretty much everyone knew it. So move-in day for the summer, I do my little floor meeting. So stoked to be a resource, tell you anything about New York. I'm so excited. After that meeting, one of my new residents comes up and he knocks on my door. And I open the door. He is like doing the thing where you like lean across the door frame, the whole bit. Brian, do you want to say something for me? Pretend to be charming while you say it.
I'll give you the line.
The line.
I've been prompted. What's good in New York?
God, thank you. So he says that. And then with all the genuineness of someone who has now completed the 22nd grade and tells jokes about science on stage for a living, I go, oh my God, the Museum of Natural History is my favorite place in the world. It's a pain in the ass because it's on the Upper West Side, so you get a transfer, but bring your student ID for the discount. I'm going. And maybe it was when I was talking about like the dinosaur exhibit, maybe the blue whale hanging from the ceiling, I don't know. At some point in there, I crane my neck, I look up, and I see the look on his face, and in that moment, I have a realization, an insight, if you will, that is not what he meant by that question. So that was a social interaction of mine, and does that bring us?
Yeah, it's
to
a
our
great
first story?
segue actually to our first storyteller. So
Look at that, like we planned this.
our first storyteller is a science communicator. They're an educator. They're a two-time winner of the Story Collider Science Story Slam. Those are events that we hold as an organization. She holds a master's degree in biology from Stanford University. You heard of that? Pretty good. And currently works in scholarly communication to help make science more accessible and equitable. Originally from Myanmar, she grew up writing silly rhymes for her friends. Her poetry career peaked when she wrote her first poem in English, An Ode to Potatoes. You really can't top that. So please, I'm going to say this person's name, but it's hard to go first. You're all so lovely. Thank you for being here. Please give me a round of applause. I don't care if you think it feels like it's maybe the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, or maybe it's the Renaissance Tour, or maybe it's like Ira Glass. I don't know who we're really into right here, but I just need like a big, warm welcome for our first storyteller, Shein Ei Cho.
Thank you. Hello. When I was a preteen in the early 2000s, I had a burn book. Okay, maybe not exactly what you may be thinking. It's not like in the movie Mean Girls at all. I didn't use it to write mean things about people. I use it to score and rank people based on how I felt about them. So my entries are more like, Mama, easily irritated, but let me do my own thing. 86 out of 100. So you see, as a child, I like writing things down and collecting data. It was my source of comfort. As a socially anxious kid, having this kind of data actually helped me make informed decisions in who I want to hang out with. In the limited time, I actually want to hang out with people. And so one day I came back home from school, and as always, walked past my aunt's hair salon, and I poked in my hair to say hi, and this is what I saw. My aunt was sitting in a circle of audience like some sort of guru. In her hand was a very familiar looking book. Brown cover, red stripes. My heart stopped. You guessed it. That was my burn book. She was reading aloud from it to everyone in the salon and laughing along at this absurdity. Hearing my inner thoughts from the burn book in the public, I felt my face burning from embarrassment. Needless to say, that was the end of my burn book. Well, with or without my trusty burn book, life went on. And as part of my package deal, so did my anxiety. From time to time, I will wake up in the middle of the night, my shirt soaked in sweat because I was obsessed about a message I sent years ago. And I couldn't sleep or wink for the rest of the night because no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't remember whether I put a smiley emoji at the end of the sentence. At those times, your brain just completely convinces you that yes, you have an 8 a.m. meeting next morning and you need sleep. And yes, you are sitting in the dark with a sweaty shirt, so you probably also need a shower. But right at that very second, none of that mattered except for this creepy smiley face drawn with a colon and a closed parentheses. On my path to overcome my anxiety, I tried everything. Therapy, meditation, medication, you name it. In my meditation class, they actually taught me a phenomenon behind my smiley face emoji predicament. So one of the lessons that they really tried to hammer into the student was that nothing is permanent. Your happiness, your sadness, anger, disappointment, none of it is permanent. Well, unfortunately for me, those lessons were not permanent. None of them stuck with me. Then one day I stumbled upon a small journal when I was wandering into a museum gift shop. The cover has beautiful bright blobs of color, and being exactly the kind of person who judges a book by its cover, I bought it. The journal has 2 columns with enough room to write maybe just a few words, like 15 to 20 words per entry. I would write what I did for that day on the left and how I feel about it on the right. So my entries are like, discover a good dim sum place on the left. What a great day on the right. Skip gym this morning on the left. Felt guilty on the right. So it's kind of like my childhood burn book, but instead of tracking relationships, I track my own feelings and activities. And I started noticing trends and different things that are usually associated with me having different feelings. And among them, I noticed that doing something creative and learning a new skill kind of made me happy and also less anxious. So when I saw a local theater offering an improv class, I signed up for it. In my journal, I wrote, first day of improv class on the left. Fun, but intimidated on the right. One of first on stage today on the left. Felt great, confident on the right. And I had such a great time after the improv class, like intro class, that after I finished it, I signed up for a level 2 class. First day went fine, I had a great time. On the second day of this level 2 class, we had to learn an improv tool called the edit. So it is where you act like an editor on the stage to cut an ongoing scene. What you have to do is you run across the stage while waving your hand in a wiping motion to signal the other performer to leave the stage, and you stay to start a new scene. So by editing, you have to cut your classmate off. And that day, I tried to practice the edit for a couple of times, and even though I was waving my hand around like a fool, I failed because My classmate didn't notice me and didn't leave the stage. Obviously, my social anxiety kicked in. Am I entering the stage at the wrong time? Are they ignoring me on purpose? What if they think I'm being rude for interrupting their scene? Well, as these thought bubbles kept popping in my head, I inched further and further away from the stage until for the rest of the class, I was just standing on the side and no longer participating in any of the scene. When I was driving home that day, I just passed by a blur of neon lights from cars. My fingernails sunk deeply into the steering wheel and my nose almost brushed against it as my shoulder hunched forward. When I got home that day, I felt like the rusty tin man in need of a good grease. My whole body was stiff. My anxiety was in full swing, baby. A tiny voice in my head was getting louder. Maybe I'm just better at this thing called improv. What's the point in trying anyway? I might as well give up. The thing that I was doing to help with my mental health has become a source of its decline. As expected, another night of tossing, turning, and a sweaty shirt. The next day, when I sat down at my desk to write in my journal, as always, I recall that I actually had a day like that one in my intro to improv class several months back. I flipped my journal to find the entry. Debut my bad haircut in class on the left. Self-conscious, didn't participate much on the right. Okay, so had a bad day in my intro class, but the intro have 8 classes in total, so what about the others? I started flipping and counting, and week after week of each improv class I wrote, what a great day. I felt awesome. I felt playful. In fact, out of 8 classes, I had a great time in 6 of them, which is the majority of the time. Since insomnia has been part of my identity, I started looking into my sleep data as well. Interestingly, even though there were many things that have kept me up at night for the past year, they turn out to be okay most of the time. Well, 78.6% of the time to be exact. And I realized that whatever the reason that was keeping me up at night didn't really matter in the end. Things were not so permanent after all. Well, it was further confirmed by the fact that 9.5% of the time, I couldn't even remember what I was being anxious about back then. So, if I wasn't convinced by my meditation class that nothing is permanent, well, now I have lived through it. I have empirical data to prove it. And my decision to keep taking improv classes turned out to be the right one, because whenever I do something creative, my positive feeling increased by 40%. So as I flip through the pages, I start seeing that my days were not just filled with anxiety, but many, many good moments as well. Just because I was anxious for one time, it's not going to dictate how I would feel for the rest of the week, or even for the rest of the day. My feelings fluctuate, just like everything else in life. Tonight, after the show, I'm going to sit down at my desk and write today's entry. On the left, told my story live at the Story Collider. How did I feel today? On the right, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shein, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. So as someone who loves both Mean Girls and data with every fiber of her being, that was a joy to coach, and it was so beautiful. Thank you. All right, so speaking of data, our next storyteller is a project data systems engineer for the Deep Space Network at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where, get this, no big deal, her team processes the data that helps spacecraft communicate with mission control back here onto Earth. Look at that. I think the closest I'll ever get to imposter syndrome is like introducing our JPL tellers. They're so cool. All right, she has a BS in electrical engineering from the University of California, Riverside, where she served as the president of the campus chapter of the Society for Women Engineers. She's also currently pursuing a Master's of Science in Space Systems at Johns Hopkins University. Please welcome to the stage, Sirina Nabhan.
Thank you. Thank you. When I graduated, I landed a job that can basically be explained as communicating with the universe. And being the space fangirl that I am, this job was perfect for me. I would be working as an operations engineer for a NASA contractor, serving as the liaison between DSN missions, between science missions and the Deep Space Network, which is this collection of antennas placed around the world that provide full communication coverage with anything that's flying beyond the moon. That's what we consider deep space. And I would be responsible for the communication link between a spacecraft on Mars, for example, and our antennas on the ground. You could think of us like a cell phone provider, but for spacecrafts. But these antennas are big, 70 meters, 340 feet. They can hear literal whispers from space. This one task I had was tracking the Voyager spacecrafts, which are spacecrafts that have been flying for 47 years at a speed of 38,000 miles an hour. They've left our solar system by now. My mind would be blown as I sat there on the console, waiting to hear back from a signal that's been traveling for 20 hours at the speed of light. It was awesome, but I was the only woman in a team of 15 other people, some of them much older men. And naturally, I spent a lot of time with my coworkers during training, at work, at happy hours after work. And because I spent a lot of time with them, I heard a lot of things from them, things I didn't necessarily want to hear. This one guy would regularly apologize for cursing in front of me. And I'm like, Jesse, I've heard the word fuck before. This other guy was just plain old creepy. He'd stop me every time I wore a dress to say, I like it when you wear a dress. These things bothered me, but I didn't speak up about them because I liked my job and I wanted my coworkers to like me. But this wasn't who I was. My mom taught me to stand up for myself. She's this cute little old lady. She's short, she wears these colorful hijabs, and she has a thick Arab accent. But that's never stopped her from speaking up against racism and other injustices. That's how she raised me and my siblings to act. In fact, when I was 9 years old, I had this bully named Dan. I still remember his name. One day, Dan called me a terrorist during recess. And being my mother's daughter, I pushed him straight to the ground. That's who I was as a kid. And when college came around, like any good immigrant kid, I decided to pursue engineering, where I joined the Society of Women Engineers, and that really helped prepare me for being the only woman in the room. This one time, at a study session that I remember so well, this girl walked in and announced that she had just gotten an internship at Boeing. She was so excited to tell everyone, but this guy across the table said something like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They're just trying to fulfill their diversity hire. I looked over at the girl and she said nothing. She just kind of laughed awkwardly. And being my mother's daughter, I let him know that was not okay. That's who I was in college. That's who I was as a kid. But when I started work, I sort of lost that. At this contractor job, a supervisor from a different department one day called me in. She told me that she understood what it was like to be the only girl on the team. She said, yeah, my guys, they'd say the dirtiest things around me. They'd even have posters of naked women on the wall. Things were much worse back then. I thought to myself, is she gonna ask me if I feel the same way? No, she already knew. She ended the conversation by saying, you have to have tough skin in this place. So I appreciated her saying that because I wanted to be where she was, managing a team. So I grew that tough skin and I dealt with the boys. But most frustrating of all was having a mentor who consistently did not hear me. He was in charge of evaluating my progress, so it was pretty important that he did. We would be in a training session, and it was so strange. I would try to answer his questions, but he'd talk right over me. Maybe he didn't hear me, I thought. He's pushing 7 years old, so he could have a hearing problem, like medically. But the other 2 guys I was training with, they got heard just fine. They would get good jobs and attaboys. Thankfully, these 2 guys understood what was happening, and they spoke up for me. They'd say things like, "Sirina just said that," when he was clearly ignoring me. In those moments, I kind of felt like that girl in the study session laughing awkwardly while someone was clearly insulting her. And because of that, it seemed like I was the least competent of the 3 getting trained. So I told myself, I'm gonna have to work way harder to be good at this job. And I did. I worked my butt off. 2 years later, we were gearing up. I was given the most important task of my career. We were gearing up to launch the Mars 2020 spacecraft, which are these rovers. And I was in charge. I had to make sure that our antennas could speak with the rover's antennas from 250 million miles away. Before that happened, I had to convince management that we could actually pull it off. So I'd be showing my calculations at this high-stakes presentation in front of a bunch of managers. And during the presentation, I was given some hard questions from the chief engineer, and I answered them. But this one manager just had to speak up. This guy was known for being harsh during these kinds of meetings. He would yell at people, he would talk down to them, all in hopes to scare them into doing their work diligently. And he'd been using this tactic for years, so it wasn't going to be any different for me. During the presentation, he tried to correct a mistake that I had made, but he didn't even have the expertise to know that he was wrong. There I was, standing in front of my slides that I was so proud of, only for him to turn his head and offer this so-called correction to my mentor and not to me. I looked at my mentor, hoping that he would tell him that's not a mistake, but he didn't. He didn't stand up for me. So I was enraged, and I couldn't hide it. I realized this was my adult version of Dan, the bully. But I wasn't a kid on the playground, and I wasn't going to push anyone this time. Instead, I blurted out, "But you're wrong." I explained to him that he was confusing launching the rover with landing the rover, and his correction just didn't apply here. I felt everyone's eyes shift to me, including this manager. I asked myself if I was going to get in trouble. Did this manager hate me now? Would I eventually be fired? I was nervous, but whatever my mom instilled in me kept me going, and I'm so glad that I did, because my future boss would be listening in, and he noticed me. After Mars 2020 successfully launched, I was promoted to JPL full-time, no longer as a contractor. But I realized that what I really wanted was a career that let me advocate for women in my work and other people so that they felt heard and had the power to speak up. So when I joined JPL, I joined the Advisory Council for Women, which is this great organization that's been advocating for women since 1977. They advocate for things like women's bathrooms in all the buildings, and maybe not smoking in all the buildings. Today, we are still advocating for things like parental leave policies, lactation rooms, and the professional development of our members. Just like I had in college, I felt so empowered and happy to be part of a group of women just like me. I realized I didn't really have to have tough skin. What I needed was my support network to give me the strength to speak up. This past October was the Society of Women Engineers Conference, the largest gathering of women in engineering in the world, and it happened to be in LA. So we wanted JPL to go big. We put together proposals, presentations, all in hopes that the JPL leadership could see the value of this conference. And they did. It worked. Not only did we send 50 women to the conference for their own professional development, but we also got funding for a special event centered around diversity and inclusion. And I made this event my wildest professional dream. Why not have a comedy show? Because comedy, just like engineering, is dominated by men. So I invited my favorite comedian from SNL, and she actually came. And so did 250 other people, way more than we expected. The event was amazing. The room had such great energy. The room was roaring with laughter. And I looked around and I asked people, whose first comedy show is this? And half the room raised their hands. My heart was so warmed by this. The event couldn't have gone better. I thanked everyone for coming. I looked around and I told the women that we are a room full of women that have been the only women in the room, and that I was so grateful to be part of this community. When I was driving home, I was so happy. I literally had a smile on my face. I just wanted to tell someone that I felt like I really affected women. So I just called up my mom. Thank you.
Give it up for Sirina. Thank you so much. Every time, I was thinking this there, especially talking space and JPL and all these things that I can appreciate, but certainly don't understand, believe it or not. I got a new car a few years ago, and new to me. It's a used car, and it had satellite radio, and I didn't even know how to work that. I couldn't turn it off. It was a whole thing. I couldn't get the warranty. So that's me with space. That's my recollection with satellites. We had 5 storytellers on the bill. One, Chris Rivas, is not feeling well, so we're going to have 4 tonight. So we're halfway through. We have 2 more stories just to kind of give us our bearings. But Chris is coming. He'll do our next show. We're going to do a couple shows a year. So stay tuned for that. He's the best. Maybe you know him. But our next storyteller, I'll say this. I'm going to read his bio, but my mom introduced me to this phrase, and she's always said that. She goes like, oh, that's just a magical person right there. And it's a very select, elite group of people who are magical people. And he's shaking his head at me, but I truly mean this. This next teller is a magical person, and you're going to see why I adore him. He's a writer, he's a performer, he's a storyteller from San Antonio, Texas, where he spent his teenage years as a gay goth, which he wants us to know was just as much fun as it sounds. He wrote a book called Bad Kid that I adore. Bad Kid, B-A-D-K-I-D. Check it out. It's wonderful. He's a member of the Groundlings Main Company, and he's the host of Risk at Lyric Hyperion. That's another storytelling show. He's performed solo works in Los Angeles, Australia, Scotland, Texas, and New York City, and his storytelling has been featured on NPR, BuzzFeed, and The Moth. You can hear him playing multiple weirdos on the Wondery's This Job is History with Chris Parnell. Please welcome to the stage my dear friend, David Crabb.
Well, it's hard to live up to that, especially when we all know, sorry, but women are funnier. Sorry, dudes. Sorry if you were sausage party looking. It's women are funnier. It's a rule, so good luck with me. So a few years ago, about 10 years ago, I was a caterer at a wedding in a refurbished Brooklyn warehouse. You know the place. And it was a long shift. I was really exhausted. There were a bunch of girls and gays dancing, screaming, "I will survive." So loud and out of tune that I knew if they did it for a minute longer, I would not. And I was trying to enjoy the night because the cool thing about it was I was getting to do the night with my fiance, Jack. We didn't really do catering, but our friend started a catering company, and she was like, "Would y'all help me?" So it was fun to be with your loved one who you were gonna marry in 3 months, even exhausted and angry at people that wouldn't tip and didn't know how to sing. But it was still a real challenge for me because I felt like garbage. My back was all out of skew. I was having dizzy spells, and I needed to use the bathroom for what would be the 15th or 20th time that day because of what I call my dark passenger. I was in a full Crohn's flare-up. I had been diagnosed with Crohn's disease a few years earlier. It's an autoimmune disease of the guts. I always like to say as a comedian, it's a fun one to have because it involves poop. It's fun. If it was a ride at the carnival, it would just be a glittering carousel of toilets exploding with confetti. And it means a lot of things. It means that you have a hyperactive bowel, you are pooping nonstop, probably means you're anemic, it probably means that you're having a lot of other health disorders with your joints and your energy levels. There was many times, at that time actually, I was down to about 118 pounds. I weigh about 152 now, thank you. If I saw someone who I hadn't seen in a long time, I had these kind of Kate Moss, Johnny Depp cheekbones, and people would see me and they're "You look great." And I'd be "Thank you, I'm dying." And I felt like garbage. More than one time in New York, I fell into a pile of garbage just because I was walking down the street and had a dizzy spell. I would wake up some mornings and I had a lot of spinal problems. That was like a fun extra take-home gift with my autoimmune disease, and it would affect my left sacrum. So sometimes when I wake up, in middle school, if you ever went to see the nurse, there was that horrible drawing of the scoliosis kid, there was like askew, and that was what I looked like. And when it was really bad, I would have to like lean against the wall of our railroad apartment in Greenpoint to get to the kitchen. And it was a terrible way to be, made worse by the fact that as a working artist, I often had large phases of my life where I had no health insurance. And if you've ever been really sick and not had health insurance, you become a crazy person. You scroll WebMD, you're looking up weird symptoms, you're hearing from your friend's cousin who is a medical student in Boston calling you to talk to you about what might be the problem. There was a whole phase where I was just getting Crohn's medicine from a Canadian pharmacy. It was a huge trend at the time. And they would just send me a white unmarked box with red unmarked pills, and I'd take them. Who knows? Deuce is wild. Let's see if this is it. One time I got in a chat forum about at-home fecal transplants. You heard me right, kids. Whole just chat boards about how you could actually do fecal transplants, which actually is a medically honored thing. There's some testimony that it works. But these were people just, how can I do it at home? We have a child. Can I use her poo? I mean, mania. And I remember there was a night when I was on that board and I thought, oh my God, I am broke and sick and I cannot do this. Now, to be fair, at this time, this night, catering this event, I had about 3 more weeks of health insurance through Actors Equity, which was basically a health insurance through a union for stage actors. And I had acted enough for that year to have health insurance, and it was going to end in 2 or 3 weeks. So I was on like a medical Rumspringa. I had been going on so many exams and tests and like, put a camera in me. I was doing it all. And about a few days before that, I had actually had a colonoscopy, and when I woke up really dreary, the doctor is there, and they're always there when you wake up from something to give you important information. Like, let me wait. I'm literally high, But the doctor basically was like, "Hey, we found something. It's really concerning. I don't want to scare you, but we need to send it away for a test, and it's going to be a little while." Now, he didn't say the C word, but all the subtitles were the C word. And cancer is something that when you have an autoimmune disease, and especially when you take drugs to suppress your immune system, you can develop all kinds of cancers. And I was so scared. And so scared that I didn't tell my fiance, Jack, who I loved and was honest with about everything, because he had been there through everything, all the weird diets, making me the weird food, seeing me weep, feel my way to the kitchen. I tried a carnivore diet for a week, and he just agreed to make me bacon, pork, eggs, and beef. Like, what was going on? I read it online. It must work. And I just couldn't tell him, so I kept it to myself. So I'm there that night, and I'm super stressed, and I finally get to use the bathroom, which when you have Crohn's disease is kind of like it's like you literally speak in tongues and hold snakes. It's like, oh, mashamalama, like it was like, oh, I did it, it's okay. I exited the bathroom in a cold sweat in my little cater apron, just like, I gotta go back to work, and they're still singing songs. And I looked in this pile of trash across the hallway, underneath the stairwell, and it looked almost like a place where a janitor had just been like sweeping garbage. No one comes down here, just leave it. And I saw something brilliant and blue kind of glistening from this pile of trash. And I leaned over it, and I realized it was the corner of a $100 bill. You remember when the new hundreds had just come out and they had like confetti and glitter and there was like a see-through panel and you could like tell who was an alien if you looked through it. It was like a hologram. It was a gorgeous like high-fashion $100 bill. And I knew what it was. And without even thinking, I realized it was in like a bank envelope and it was on a tiny clipboard with a bunch of other papers, and I just grabbed it and I shoved it in my apron. And that night, I finished the shift and me and Jack walked home, and we got home and I said, "Babe, I think I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars in my in my apron." He's like, "Come on now." And I was like, "All right, let's see." I opened it and I proceeded to count out $1,800 in $100 bills, clean, crisp, beautiful, in a bank envelope. And we realized that some of the receipts attached to this clipboard were from 3 or 4 different businesses, like florists, catering things, right? And Jack was like, "Well, you gotta call, right, and find out, whose money this is." I was like, "Yeah, I can. I will." And I looked at all the money. It was so beautiful, so new, and it felt almost like life had given me like a tip. Like, "We're sorry, David, but you might fall off of health insurance soon and have cancer, so here's almost $2,000. And over the next few days, I thought about it, and I asked a lot of people, what should I do? And I would ask some people who I thought would say, oh, you need to give it back. And they'd be like, David, this money is yours. This is an angel. That you've had a hard year. You weigh nothing. Look at you. Keep it, right? Just don't do any of that fecal transplant stuff. Keep the money. And then other people wouldn't say that. And I remember I asked my one friend who I was sure was going to be like, oh, David, you got to keep it. I know what we can do with it, right? And she said, well, giving it back is the right thing to do. And I said, really? I thought you would keep it. And she's like, hell yeah, I'd keep it. I'm just telling you what the right thing to do is. A few days after that, I had to go in on my Rumspringa for this MRI that the doctor who had seen the shadow wanted me to go in for. And I went in, and it wasn't my first time at the rodeo. I popped my Xanax, so I didn't have a fit in the tube. And when I came out, I walked into the room where there's always the friendly people in scrubs. There's the person manning the computer who's seen your insides. And I was just like, everything looked good in there? And she just took this weird, deep breath and said, your doctor will call you. And I got on the train, and I was just like, what is already more broken about my already broken body? Like, what else can there be? And then when I got home, I just, almost like in a fever, I just counted out the $1,800, and I looked at it, and I was like, what does $1,800 do for a person with no health insurance in America with a cancer diagnosis? Nothing. And I just felt this fit of like, almost like the money was like a curse. Like, I can't have this. And I pulled the first receipt off the clipboard, and I called. It was this place, the Gallery of Flowers in Manhattan. And this guy answered, he said, hello. He had this like light, like, I don't know, like South American accent. I couldn't identify, but he just said, hello, Gallery of Flowers, this is Omar. And I said, hi, did you lose money recently? I just like wanted to get it out there. And he paused, and then he said, well, yes, a few weeks ago, I lost $1,800 in cash while doing a flower delivery. Got to the next day. I am traveling through Manhattan, and I have the money in my pocket, and I feel like it's like burning a hole. I feel the money. It's like I can't tell if the money is telling me, keep me, you deserve me, or is the money being like, you need to get rid of me or you'll have cancer. Like, one or the other. Like, I can't figure it out. And I get to the Gallery of Flowers, and I want the Gallery of Flowers to be like the Bevmo of flowers, like a huge business run by like a brutal millionaire who doesn't need the money, but it's not. It is like a hole in the wall, a tiny little florist. I walk in, and it's almost like there's like literally 4 times as many flowers as should be in this room. It is like a jungle, and the flowers are crazy. Like, some of them are dipped in like red and gold paint. Some of the tulips have like gold leaf applied to them. It is crazy, and I move through these 2 vases that form a kind of bridge. I need to move these giant lilies out of the way, and I look, and I say, Omar? And there's this man behind the counter. He's probably in his mid-late 50s, and he looks at me, and he puts his hands on his chest, and he says, David? And I say, yes. And he extends his arms. He says, you are my angel. And what I want to say is, no, I'm kind of almost a thief, okay? I go to him, and I hand him the money, and I say, I found out I should have called you sooner. I'm going through all this stuff. And he's like, no, don't worry. I knew I would get this back. And I said, you knew you would get this back? And he said, yes. My problem is I believe in God too much. Which I'm like, weird problem, but okay. Like, I guess I kind of... And, we're talking there for a minute. And at a certain point, he tries to give me $300. I'm like, no, I don't want it. No, I don't want it. No, I don't want it. And we do this back and forth. And I'm like, please, really. I'm just glad that I could give it back to you. And, he's like, look, losing this money would not have been the worst thing that has happened to me. And I'm standing there just like sweating, dizzy, weighing like I weigh like a wet towel. I'm so like sick of life and tired. And I'm like, yeah, worse things could happen to you. Like what? And then he tells me that he lived with his partner in an apartment in Manhattan for over 30 years, and that he had a green card and never became a citizen, and that his partner died about 6 weeks earlier. And because his dead partner's family never accepted him or the relationship, and he had no claim, that they were stealing his home, and that he was losing his home of over 35 years, and then he had 3 cats that they loved, but he could only keep one of them because of where he was living now. And I said, where are you living now? And he opened a little door behind the counter, and he gestured to this tiny windowless room where I saw these 2 little feline eyes glowing up at me from an air mattress. And I said, I'm so sorry. And he looked at me and he said, worse things have happened. And I immediately just like, please, I'm so sorry. And I started apologizing, which makes him want to give me more money again. And I'm like, no, I don't want your money. I don't. And he's like, please. And finally I say, look, how about this? I won't take money, but you can do flowers for me. I have an event coming up. And he's like, what's going to happen? And I say, I'm marrying my partner. And he's like, oh, how long have you been together? And I say, oh, 10 years? And he's like, oh, 10 years. And he looked at me and he just patted my shoulder and he says, oh, you have so much time. And I'm trying not to cry at this point because he's in the worst place than me. And very sweetly, he's like, I want to show you my art. And he takes me to this wall that is like around the corner of another like tropical jungle, like sculpture. And it is this wall that looks like it is like red and green and gold paint and gold leaf, and there's like rubies attached to it. There's like pictures and decoupage. It's like a weird gay telemundo graffiti thing. There's like literally like 20 different images of Frida Kahlo, like decoupaged in it. And he's showing me this wall and he's talking about his art. And he picks up this little chest. It's like a little tiny trunk and it's gold. And he opens it, and inside it's just full of like costume jewelry and like rhinestones and like loose pearls. It looks like the bottom of a drag queen's purse. It's just like, wow. And I'm looking at it and it's velvet lined and I'm like, oh my God, Omar, that is so beautiful. And as I'm looking at it, I realize that across the top of it, there's this one piece of barbed wire. And it's got one prong on it. And that there's like red paint on the tip of the barb. And I say, oh, someone got hurt. And he looks at me and he puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, well, sometimes you get hurt trying to get to the good stuff of life down there. And I burst into tears. It's like Alan Ball is scripting my life. Like, this is the saddest 6 Feet Under episode that was never released. And I'm crying, and he's like, it is okay, my friend. And I'm like, no, it's not. Look at your own life. Like, I'm so upset. And he's like comforting me. And I leave that day, and I say, I'm going to be in touch. You're going to do flowers for wedding. He's like, I want to, please. And bring Jack to meet me. And I go home, and I get home to Jack, and I am just so upset. And I say, I returned the money in this guy, and he needs the money more than me. We're so lucky. And as I'm going through all of this, my husband, my soon-to-be husband, is like, well, what do you need? And I was like, and he knows what I need. When I am stressed or traumatized or upset, I need to watch a super violent horror movie. It's my thing. So we put on The Purge, which if you don't know about it, it's a movie where like one night a year in a hypothetical America, murder's legal. So if you're rich, you better lock your doors because people in weird like Target masks are gonna come and like murder you and take your stuff. And we start the movie and we're watching it. And as we're watching it, I noticed that my phone, and thanks AT&T, like didn't give me, I didn't hear my phone ring, and it's my doctor. And I stand in front of the couch and I check the message, and the doctor says, hey, David, it's your doctor. I just want to tell you everything came back fine. He says, there's nothing, and I always remember, he said, there's nothing remarkable about your test. And I always think, what a fabulous way to tell someone they're not going to die, right? You're just irremarkable. You're boring. Enjoy life. I start crying, and I turn to Jack, and he's like, what's going on? And I say, I don't have cancer. And he's like, did you think you did? And I'm like, yes. And then I go into the whole thing and what I'd been holding inside, and he's just like holding me on the couch, and he hugs me so tight. And as he's hugging me, I look at the TV, and this guy in this weird devil angel mask is like, he has this millionaire by the hair, and he's just pounding her face into a glass table over and over again, and I'm crying, and I'm holding my husband, and I'm thinking, God, life is so beautiful, and I'm so happy I get to live it, you know? A few days later, Jack and I go to the Gallery of Flowers, and when we go in, Omar's there, and he has 3 wine glasses and a bottle of wine, and he welcomes us, and he sits us down. And I'm looking around, and I realize as he's talking, because he's saying, like, something happened. I've been spending time upstate with my friend. She has a house. I might live there. She has fields of tulips all around her house. And I just imagine Omar, like, walking in actual living flowers, which is kind of a beautiful thing to imagine. And I feel like I'm hearing someone tell me that it's going to be okay for them. And as he's doing that and asking us about ourselves, I look around the shop at all these flowers, and I realize that all these flowers that he's dipped in enamel and paint and glitter and rhinestones, I realize if you look really closely, you can tell that kind of underneath all that, like, y'all, they're dead. Like, half these flowers, they're gone for this world. And I point that out, and he's like, well, yes, it's cold, it's the end of the season, and that's what I do for them. And I'm like, well, what a weird, beautiful way to send off these things, right? Just dress them up like RuPaul and say bye, you know? And I'm sitting with Jack at the table, and Omar's talking about going upstate and the shop and what he's going to do, and my eyes wander to the wall where he showed me all of that art. And I realized that in the center of it, I never noticed for all the fake pearls and Frida Kahlo, but there's just this black and white photo of these two men, and they're sitting side by side, and they're probably in their early 20s. And I look really closely, and I realize that one of them is Omar, and then I realize the other one is probably his husband who's gone. And as I look at it, Jack just grabs my hand under the table, and I remember what Omar told me, that we have so much time, so much time. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, David Crabb. That was magical. I think it was magical. Thank you. All right, that brings us to our fourth and final storyteller of the night, who, get this, has won 9 Moth Story Slams and the 2019 New York Grand Slam Championship. Look at him. He worked as an actor, writer, and teacher for Chicago's famed Second City Theater for over 20 years. His autobiographical stories can be heard on the Moth Radio Hour and the Risk podcast, as well as read in Men's Health magazine and the Moth's 20th anniversary book, All These Wonders.
And he's also the person who got me into storytelling 9 years ago, so it's kind of his fault that I'm here. Please give a warm welcome to our final storyteller of the night, my dear friend, Mr. Kevin McGeehan.
In August of 2021, I was sitting in a 10-person group therapy circle at a mental health wellness facility outside Phoenix, Arizona. It was day 3 of an IOP, an intensive outpatient program. And that day, all eyes were on me because I had just been asked the question, why are you here? Now, I did not want to answer this question because for me to do so honestly, I was going to have to reveal something about myself that I had kept secret for a very long time. But I was there to get better, and one way for me to do that was to face some fears and to say some things out loud. So I sat up in my chair, I took a deep breath, and no matter how hard it was for me to say, I answered the question. 15 years earlier, I became my mother's primary caregiver for her final 5 months. Being a primary caregiver to someone who is dying can be an incredibly rewarding experience, but it also can take a physical, mental, and emotional toll. And I tried to give off that I was handling everything great, but after a few months of it, I was a tempest in a teapot. And one day, a few weeks before she died, I finally cracked. So I was in the kitchen, simultaneously doing 3 things. I was physically putting away the dishes, I was mentally dangling by a thread, and I was emotionally unraveling. My mother was on a couch with a front row seat. A metal pan dropped. There was a loud clang, and I felt that sound through my entire body. And my hands started shaking, and my shoulders seized up, and I felt like my entire nervous system was short-circuiting. There was chaos in my head, and this chaos started to grow over the next 30 seconds, and it got to a point where I was completely overwhelmed by rage, self-loathing, and this built-up energy that had to go somewhere. So without any sort of conscious thought, I raised my hand in the air, and I hit myself twice in the face, and then I immediately snapped out of it. And I could not explain what had just happened to me. Now, my mother had seen me throw some temper tantrums in my life, but what she had just seen was something that was very different, and she implored me to seek help. And I had never hit myself before, and it scared me because I couldn't explain it. So I promised her I would seek help. But then she died. No one else knew about it, and I deluded myself into thinking that I was strong enough mentally to defeat whatever this weakness was I was experiencing. So as opposed to seeking help, what I did instead was not seek help. And for the next 15 years, these out-of-control self-harm breakdowns happen multiple times a year. Always by myself, always in secret, and always followed by crippling shame. To this day, I have never hit another person, nor have I harmed an animal. But no one could know this about me because I did not want anyone to be scared for me, or worse, scared of me. So I continued the secret, I lived with the shame, and because of that, I felt alone. And I hated feeling alone. on November 8th, 2020, I had the biggest breakdown I had had yet. It was intense, it was painful, and it was all I could take. So I told my then girlfriend about the breakdown, and I said that I needed to seek help. And I'm so glad I did, because with her knowledge of neuroscience, she gave me an out-of-the-box idea for what to do that I would have never thought of myself, which was to actually look at my brain and see what is going on inside. So, through a strange scheduling thing, on my 50th birthday, I walked into the Amen Clinic in Encino, California, and got my first SPECT brain scan, a single photon emission computed tomography brain scan. Now, what they do is they take 3D images of your brain, and what they do is they will take two sets of pictures, one in a concentrative state and one in a relaxed state. And then from there, they track blood flow, and they are able to, they are looking for three things. What areas of the brain are working and functioning normally, what areas are working too hard, and what areas are not working hard enough. So after I was injected with a radioactive tracer, the technician brought me into a brown-walled room where he had me lay on this long table, and above me, there were three big boxes. And inside each of those boxes was a gamma camera. And then he instructed me that for the next 20 minutes not to move a muscle while these gam cams, my word, not theirs, circled my head and took pictures of my now radioactive brain. And as I lay there, wondering if I was finally going to get answers, I felt something that I had not felt in a very long time: hope. So a few weeks later, I got the call from the doctor so we could have our Zoom meeting to go over my scans. He was a very nice man. He had glasses and a calming voice, and we talked for about an hour. And top sheet, he diagnosed me with anxiety, depression, ADHD, and PTSD. He also informed me that I had low levels of certain neurotransmitters, including dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Now, this was a lot of information to get at once, and I was completely overwhelmed by it, while at the same time, I was also distracted by the fact that every time I see or hear the word norepinephrine, I cannot help but think of the writer-director of Sleepless in Seattle, Nora Ephron, which that thought right there confirmed the ADHD diagnosis. So as I'm taking all this in, the doctor says to me nonchalantly, he goes, "You know why you hit yourself, right?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he goes, "More times than not, it's a trauma response, and it's more common than you think." And because he and I were the same age, he gave me a 70s sitcom summation of what was going on. So on the TV show Happy Days, something happens that causes the jukebox in Al's Diner to start skipping. Now, this skipping causes chaos. And this chaos is not going to stop until cool guy Arthur Fonzarelli, a.k.a. Fonzie, a.k.a. the Fonz, goes over to that jukebox and he hits it, and then it starts to work. Oversimplified. My nervous system is that jukebox, and there are unresolved traumas in my brain that are hijacking it and causing it to skip. And once the chaos ensues, my frightened brain wants so badly to get back to normal. So between fight, flight, or freeze, it chooses the Fonz. And as the doctor told me that, we started to discuss possible options. And the thing that we decided that I could do was I could join an IOP, an intensive outpatient program, where the sole purpose was to resolve and put away the past traumas and the dysregulated emotional issues that were causing the breakdowns. And if I can get to that goal, then Fonzie goes away. And that, I said to the 10-person group therapy circle at the mental health wellness facility outside Phoenix, Arizona, is why I'm here. And the room was silent, and I immediately regretted saying everything that I said. And my fear was that they were appalled at what I had just revealed, or they were all too young to know who Fonzie is. But then everyone in the group started to react. Now, the next minute or so for me has been Maya Angelou in my head, in that I do not remember what these people said, but I remember exactly how they made me feel. And I felt blanketed in positivity, affirmation, and acceptance. I felt unburdened. I felt relieved. And I felt heard. This was an incredibly big moment for me. This was so important, and I was just taking it in and feeling every bit of it until a woman named Teresa raised her hand. Now, Teresa's not her real name, but when I asked her if I could share this story, she said, yes, just don't use my real name. I said, what do you mean to call you? She said, Teresa. So Teresa said, and I'm paraphrasing, that what she had just seen me do was remarkably brave. And it had inspired her to say out loud for the first time ever that for many years she had also secretly hit herself under the exact same circumstances that I just described. And in a flash, Teresa got to experience exactly what I just did because all of that positive energy went right to her. And I could see the look of relief on her face as she became unburdened by that same shameful secret. And it was beautiful to watch. But I will admit that while it was happening, I could not help but think, God damn it, are you fucking kidding me right now? It was like she announced she was pregnant at her friend's baby shower. Now, I got over that quickly, and we went on break, and we went into the hallway. And Teresa came up behind me, and she playfully said, hey, didn't mean to steal your spotlight back there. And I whipped around, and I said, don't you ever steal my spotlight again. Hitting yourself, that's my thing. I called it. And then we laughed, and then we started for the next few minutes to bond and connect over something that neither she and I would ever talk about to anyone else, but now that it was out in the open, was someone else who understood. And we even started doing this fun organic bit where we started to try to one-up each other of whose inspirational story of self-harm had more of an impact on the room. And what delights me about that moment is that morning, Teresa and I each had a secret that brought us shame. But by midday, it was no longer a secret. And we were talking openly about it. And we were bantering openly in a hallway like we were two fun characters in a movie written by norepinephrine. I used to think that having the problem was weakness. But that day with Teresa made it abundantly clear to me that not addressing the problem was weakness. And before we went back into the room, there was still one more thing I needed to know. And I asked Teresa, I said, you've never told anyone, and you didn't have to, so why today? And Teresa looked at me, and she took a moment, and with such kindness, said something to me that I did not realize how much I needed to hear. When she said, I saw how hard it was for you to say, and I didn't want you to feel alone. Hey.
Give it up for Kevin and all of our 4 storytellers. Thank you so much, all of you. You're all so wonderful. It's no small feat to really stand up here and share a piece of yourself like that, like all of them did tonight. So if you're interested in getting involved or pitching a story or anything, you can reach us at storycollider.org. We're getting those pitches all the time.
Yeah, so you can pitch us to tell a story on stage, or if you saw them do that and you're like, yikes, stage, no thank you, but you still want to learn how to do this maybe. We also offer workshops as of a couple months ago. I am no longer a college professor, thank God, and thank you. I direct our education program full time, so if this is something that you'd like to learn to do in your workplace, or if you teach college classes, you want to bring us in, we can teach you how to do this. I think we're a barrel of giggles, aren't we?
That's what we are. That's what we were a barrel of.
Yeah.
And just a final thank you. So to all our storytellers, and thank you to everyone at LA. So we got John Cohen, Executive Director, Becca Stummy, our events producer back there. She was up here at the top. Tony Federico, he's hiding back there. He's the man behind the curtain. This is his domain. He's the best. Kristen Payne back there, Kristen Ranger, they're the Kristens at the table, and Michael Leva and Laura Dukes, the interns. So thank you so much. Tell the stories how tell the storytellers how wonderful they are, because they are. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for coming out. Be safe. We love you.
y'all.
Thank you so much. Good night.